Here we are on a rescue mission based on a recent Disasters #1 film, and in it there was a segment about the old Arfix Heinkel, and here we are trying to liberate this one from disaster. So let's get on with it. Second hand, clearly. I don't remember ever seeing this. You get, well, the brush is still there and 4 paints, the glue's gone. The 4 paints, very interesting, are kind of grey-green, the very pale, was it duck egg blue underside colour, black, and a lighter green. First thing that strikes me is there's red and brown to go, but a whole pot for that would be a bit much, wouldn't it? I do wonder if they're still live. I bet they are, those paints. The next thing that strikes me is that is one of the most dismal pieces of box art I've ever seen. You can hardly see the camouflage, talk about anything else. Lifeless. And there it is. This was half price, and I've, by looking through, I can vaguely see underneath through this polythene. I probably won't see it, show it in a shot. It won't come through, but it was $6.99. I can tell you now, I didn't pay that for it. I paid more. So that's this. And after all that, it's in a cellophane wrapper as well, which is easy enough to get in, but you know, plenty of packaging there, folks. Well, there's the parts still in the bag, and despite a bit of shine and reflection and some dodgy lighting, I think it's pretty easy to see that this certainly is an old vintage, obviously, and I can just see, although I don't think the camera will pick them out, in there 2 lying down crew members, which I don't quite, they're like remoulds of the original lying down guy that Arfix did. So perhaps there's some modernisation gone on here, but let's say it's kind of mid-period Arfix at best. And the markings are worth pointing out because there's so few of them. God, the light's really odd today, but anyway, that's it. But it will come out alright, I'm sure, unless I make a mess of it. Should be fine, shouldn't it? Let's enjoy this one. This is not just the obligatory look at the parts. What I'm really impressed by, I know you get it sometimes in some cases, but look, basically where you have parts which are repeated, they've been put on sprues that are reflections of one another, if you get what I mean. So it's all very symmetrical. Here we go. You see. So it's only where there's specific differences that you get something anomalous. I find that very rewarding. I do know you get it now and again, but this is one of the best examples. And even on the wings, the underside and the upper side are on the same bit of sprue. How about that? That's quality. Well done. Just a little undercoating then, grey on the underside for now, and a bit of that usual fairly, what can you call it? Almost toneless green. But there's some of the bits. Bit of a clean up. Look, there's some nasty, very nasty stuff like that. I've put loads of bits together. The usual thing, you're waiting for some things to dry, so move on to others. Obviously the wings, not the fuselage because it's a bad fit. We'll come back to that in a minute. but other little bits and pieces, and I think I haven't mentioned this before, but I often glue them together on the sprue. There we are with the two sides of the engine cowling and one of the bits of the tail. For instance, that way you don't have things floating about all over the show and getting lost. So there's some more, both sides, various tail fin bits and pieces. So that's where I'm up to, because I'm not... hang on. Because I've lost the glassware. I've lost all the bits, the transparent bits. What? You're going to have the sort of sound of the harp, and time will pass. Where's the glass? Glass isn't where it's meant to be. Where's the glass? What have I done with the glass? I've lost the glass. Well, it wasn't a harp, it was a xylophone, but you know, it means after an extremely long period of time, months, I found the glassware. So we can move on. And to my disappointment, I remembered it hasn't come out of the mould brilliantly well. There's not great lines on the cockpit, which I know it's an old model and they weren't originally, but I think the mould had just about had it by now, because look, it's almost formless and its flash is quite thick. Things like that. So it's going to be difficult. I've popped two in and they were also a little bit formless. There was no definition around the edges. So it meant some glue. So they'll probably steam up. Apart from that, I've got all the other bits together, all in one place, and so things can start to really move on now. So that's what I'm going to do. Sadly, it's one of these types. You can see the size of the gap. There was always a bit of a gap when I just generally put it together, but then adding that obviously is a little bit too wide, and just a fraction of a millimetre out here and there, and it's all adding up. So, do I give in and use filler, or do I present this as an example of what you'll get if you get your hands on one of these old models? I don't know, see what I can do. I'm not going to take it beyond this without painting, I think. I don't want to go slapping paint around over the glassware. So, suddenly, fuselage together, just about. Wings on, just quite big cracks here and there, and the tail. So it's the main part of the aircraft. As usual, that kind of thing very often goes very quickly. And now we've got painting and detail. Meanwhile, while things are drying, let's have a look at the one I made earlier. And it is I believe, the most up-to-date Arfix Heinkel. And this was one I made a long time ago when the computer didn't work, as usual. And it was a real beauty to make. There's a lot of interior detail which you don't really get to see. But, you know, everything was just fantastic. All the parts went together nicely. You felt like you were really making progress every time you put a part on. And this is a model that wanted to be made. Which is a shame that there is nothing left of the film of me making it. But never mind. And I was really obedient and did everything just as I should, and I didn't fiddle about or any of that. And even put the light. He isn't going to do us any favours here. Even managed to get that marking on without breaking it, for want of a better phrase. So there's a success and a proper beauty. I know the cockpit canopy glass is a bit iffy, but for me, early on, that's wonderful. Meanwhile, on the other hand, there's this. There's the earlier, see, saying model is wrong, isn't it? But there's the earlier version of the Heinkel with the more usual cockpit layout. And this is by Rodin, or Rodin. And it may be the worst model I've ever made. Absolutely nothing wanted to fit together. I'd been warned, but I was like, yeah, I've always wanted to make one of these. Look, it's the famous Pedro, which I think there's a good few photographs of, but there's also a marvellous painting of. I might be able to find that one day. I'll drop it into a different film. With the lovely little Scotty dog on the tail. And as we know, I'm into this interwar stuff, and also very interested in, because I don't know enough about it, interested in the Spanish Civil War. So I wanted to make that version, and here it is. And as I say, nothing, absolutely nothing fitted together. And in the end, here's a confession, the gaps were so bad that I couldn't get the filler to operate. Or I could along there, but the gaps widened up because they hadn't got the taper right. And look what I've done. Desperate measures, and I wish I'd done it better. That's sellotape across the top. And you can really see it there because that was a bit of a complex shape. So that was just an outright disaster. And consequently, you know, when you've lost a grip, I just slapped the paint over the glassware and made a right mess. So, oh, do you know, if I'd known it was going to be that bad, there's a real psychology to model making, I'm now finding. If I'd been mentally prepared, I'd probably have done a better job. And I'd made sure, you know, all the knife blades were fresh and new and everything was ready to go. So I didn't have to sort of poke around and go, oh, where's the filler? And that kind of thing. So, you know, one day I'm going to have to buy both of these again. But this is costing me money now. You know, this wasn't cheap in the first place. It's come from far away. And, blow it, I just can't, you know, there's other things to make as well, aren't they? You get stuck in a rut otherwise. Still haven't got the mummy made, you know. So, there we are. From a distance, that one's a beauty. Really like that aircraft. And of course, the gorgeous standard Heinkel there. Great aircraft, great model. We'll come back to them one day. You know, everybody, you can hear it just in the air, can't you? Lottery win. There we go. Well, I've got the cockpit canopy on at last, and it was an absolute monster. It does seem to be a very good example of a model whose mould's time had come. Things were a little bit out of shape. It's all a bit messy. I've got to tidy up all of the paintwork, but look. You can see the two sides didn't want to fit together, and then they don't fit very well onto the fuselage. I've tried different ways of doing it, and this is it where all the problems are averaged out. Because if, let's say, you fit this perfectly on the top, the underside has a gap of about 1 millimetre. So this is an average. I don't know what you call it, kind of averaging out of problems. And I've just knocked one of the bombs off on the underside. Oh well, there we go. So smarten up the paintwork, hide the gaps, and get some markings on next. Here it is, the poor old thing, done at last. It has taken so long. I reckon it's been nearly a year between starting and finishing it, and in fact I've only just glued on those two bits because I've been waiting for things to dry for so long. The bombs underneath are not happy chappies. It took a long time for them to settle. But there we are, one rather lovely Heinkel. It was a neat little model on the whole, apart from the gaps along the top, and a very pleasant model to build. Oh, and apart from the gaps in the cockpit canopy. But really it flew along and it was fine. So another one that I approve of, I have to say. Very, very good. I suppose we could say this is an interwar aircraft, because according to the instructions it was first displayed in January 1936. I don't need reading glasses yet, and 36 was getting close, so you could argue it's a pre-war, not interwar, but then I'm not, well, who cares. But anyway, a lovely aircraft. The nose obviously is just spectacular. I do not know, some expert out there will know, why that kind of thing didn't really catch on. American bomber had one, didn't it? I've just remembered. Pictures come up in my mind's eye. Can't think what it was. Anyway, so a fantastic looking aircraft. It was kind of tested, particularly an earlier version, in the Spanish Civil War, just before the Second World War. And I think it kind of proved itself absolutely remarkable there, but that was a different kind of war with a different kind of, or an enemy with very different kind of equipment. Meanwhile, this version is a slightly upgraded version, and the instruction says a particular feature is the dorsal gun turret and improved armament, together with a redesigned nose and more powerful engines. And the engines can get it up to 295 miles an hour. If only it had touched the 300, eh? Wouldn't that have been fun to fly? I do think it's another one of those remarkable aircraft for the nose alone, but then you've got a rather fabulous wing shape. This is a very distinct aircraft, which makes shooting at it from the ground quite easy, because you'll know which one's yours and which one's the enemy. But apart from that, what a magnificent aircraft.